Well, hi there, everyone. It's Pat Mesiti here, and wow, what a great joy and great privilege today to present to you one of the smartest minds in the country. James McPherson is the host of his own show, the James McPherson Show, on the Good Source podcast. But James also former journalist, brilliant thinker, incredible theologian. But I'm not asking him to come on a theological basis here. But he's a bit of a political satirist, and he's got great insight. I listen to his show and probably have stolen more stuff from him that I would like to admit to. And James is going to have an interview, and then over a couple of sessions, we're going to be doing some monologue with James, and really to give us some perspective of what's going on in our crazy world. So, James, welcome to Live at 5, the No Grey Zone.
Hey, thanks, Pat. Great to be with you. Nice to see you after quite a few years since we've caught up. So I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, well, mate, you are a hero to me. I love your voice, James. I love what you're saying. I love how you're helping people. You pull no punches. And, you know, oh, by the way, also, guys, he's a contributor to Spectator magazine. So, James, let me cut right to the chase. What the heck is going on?
But I came on this interview so you could tell me. I think everyone's asking the same question. It's like the whole world has collectively lost its mind. And I sort of thought this is just a phase that the world is going through. You know, we caught the Chinese flu, and maybe we've got a bit of a mental flu, but we'll all recover in a couple of weeks, right? You get through it. But I'm not so sure anymore. I am very concerned that this state of madness may well be here to stay. Short of war or a spiritual revival, there's going to need to be some circuit breaker to change things. I thought maybe coronavirus would be the circuit breaker, and coronavirus seems to have only magnified the madness that was boiling under the surface. So I agree with you. The world has gone completely insane.
It's like we got hit with this, well, I call it a phantom virus, but this phantom plague, and then all of a sudden everything came to pass. It's like we relived the flu of the 1920s. We lived the riots of the 60s, the anarchism and everything. How much do you think this has been brought about by the election of Donald Trump? Because I noticed a shift. When Hillary was in, all the Katy Perry's, the Kumbaya, peace, joy, and love people were going to come out. The world was going to be a wonderful, a place, the ultimate panacea, and the age of Aquarius. And then they lost the election. Yeah. And all of a sudden, these peace-loving, wonderful flower power people started to riot in the street. What's your take on that?
Well, firstly, Pat, in terms of the phantom flu, I'm not sure the 800,000 people who died of the phantom flu would call it the phantom flu.
Well, okay.
But I understand the point you're making. Has it been exaggerated and the danger of it blown out of all proportion? And I think when it comes to Trump, you need to understand that the left have invested a great deal in creating a narrative by which they can create on earth their version of utopia. Since the 1960s, the left have invested enormously in taking over all the instruments of culture, the education system, Hollywood and entertainment. And then suddenly Trump comes along, who is not beholden to the narrative. He's a billionaire. He doesn't need the money. He doesn't need the challenge. I remember when Trump ran in 2016, and someone asked him, what happens if you lose? And he says, well, I'll go back to being a billionaire. And so Trump is dangerous to the left because he's not beholden to them. He doesn't care what they think. Trump has been a scoundrel. He's admitted all of his sins, and he seems not to care that much about them. So you could call him a hypocrite, and he says, yeah, I totally am. What's that to you? And so the rise of Trump becomes a threat to the left because Trump will say what we have not been allowed to say. And so Trump threatens to smash every pretense that the left have created. And so they are fighting tooth and nail to prevent his re-election, having failed.
No, they certainly are. I mean, I've been watching some of the film clips and video clips out there and what Antifa is doing. But if I could just go back back to one of the things we said, like, you know, of course there is a virus, a coronavirus is really real. But I found from the moment this thing hit the news, it just got blown out of proportion. The modeling was wrong. It seemed like they kept pushing an agenda for vaccines and pushing this. No talk about setting up an immune system. No talk about looking after our elderly. It was almost like, great, let's shut the nation. Whereas the Lancet Medical Journal says the masks don't work, the lockdowns don't work. But we've got Dictator Dan down there in Victoria, who seems the more screws he screws down, the more problems it's becoming. How much does media play in the mindset of people, not just with coronavirus, but just as a whole, the whole woke culture and racism? It's all like, it's like if I can use a minestrone right now, you know, of stuff. How much has the media, in your opinion, as a journalist and a media personality, played in spreading the dread?
The media has been essential for spreading the dread. You mentioned a few things before we get to the media. You mentioned the modeling. You know, they call it computer science, don't they? And they add the word science on the end of computer to make it sound like it's not more than fancy guesswork. And we've seen with climate science that the modeling has been out by miles. And then we've come to coronavirus and we're expected to trust the modeling. Well, according to Tim Flannery's modeling, Perth should be a ghost town by now because of climate changing. We should never have snow again in New South Wales or rain filling our dams. That was modeling.
Yeah.
All of it was proven to be overblown and out by miles. And then we come to the coronavirus and we're told, trust the modeling. We already know that the modeling is about as good as your local astrology column in the newspaper. And then when it comes to our leaders, I think what the coronavirus has revealed, sadly, is the incredible mediocrity of political leadership.
Yeah.
But even if you look around the world, name for me one great world leader on the world stage at the moment. It's very difficult to come up with a name. And if you want to talk about state premiers, I'm sure they're lovely people, but I think the coronavirus has exposed them to be very ordinary thinkers.
I think not only that, and I concur with you 100%, James, but I think what it exposes is a complete political agenda at the expense of people's freedoms that we have. Like I have a child interstate. I can't see her. For the first time in history, it's like the healthy are quarantined. That's never happened before.
Right.
I mean, you know, in the biblical days, you had the leper colonies, but we've never done this. First time in our federation that we have 7 countries. Well, you know, we've got and our prime minister isn't the prime minister. As Bronwyn Bishop said, he is the prime minister. What can people do out there? Because I get asked, people are frustrated, James, and you know, you're a bit of an insider and a bit in the know. What can people do in these situations?
There's that old adage, you know, never let a great crisis go to waste. And there are certainly politicians and people who have latched onto this coronavirus crisis and said, here's an opportunity to reshape some things and to get a compliant public to do what they otherwise would not have done.
Yeah.
Look, I think the most important thing people can do, not just in this present time, but at any stage, is to tell the truth and to speak plainly. Yeah. And for years now, we have been unable to speak plainly for fear of being cancelled, for fear of being ostracized, for fear of being smeared on social media. And that's a genuine fear because, you know, in the old days, we used to forgive and forget, but the internet means, you know what, they might forgive, but no one will ever forget.
No one forgets, yeah.
It's online forever. And so the stupidest thing you can do these days is tell the truth.
Yeah.
And yet, that's why, interestingly, J.K. Rowling has been very outspoken about transgender issues. The reason J.K. Rowling has been outspoken about the fact that a woman is not a man who decided he's feeling a bit floral today. But J.K. Rowling can say that because she is independently wealthy. What are they going to do to her? Say we're not printing any more Harry Potter books. Well, she doesn't need to write another paragraph, and she's set for the rest. But you and I can't do that.
No, gosh. Yeah.
If we say the wrong thing, our reputation is destroyed. We've lost our livelihood. But these times call for people to be brave and to simply tell the truth and to say what they really think. And if we're not prepared to speak plainly and tell the truth, then we will forever be at the mercy of our political masters who set the agenda and tell us up is down and down is up. Can I give you an example, Pat?
Yeah, go for it, Joe. Floor's yours.
The way the media twist things. News, I used to work as a journalist for many years. News is simple to write. The introduction needs to be short and sharp and tell the reader what happened, preferably in less than 25 words. But listen to this. This was on CNN just a few days ago. I'll read for you what they wrote. This is their introduction. 2 Chicago police officers pulled over a person suspected of having a gun, and all 3 ended up hospitalized with gunshot wounds. Now, according to CNN's headline, the act of pulling a suspect over resulted in everyone just, quote, getting gunshot wounds. So here's what happens according to CNN. Police pull over a car and then yada, 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 and everyone ended up shot. So I read that and I thought, what happened between officers pulled over a person and all 3 ended up hospitalized? But that didn't seem important to CNN's incurious reporter. Yeah. There they all are, the suspect, the police officers gathered together on the curb when bullets started falling from the sky like rain. And all 3 ended up hospitalized with gunshot wounds. Did the officers shoot themselves? Did they trip and fall on some bullets? Maybe it was those damn magic gunshot wound fairies playing their harmless pranks again. Or, and this is just a wild guess, Pat, maybe the man stopped by police pulled a gun, shooting and wounding the 2 officers before himself being shot by a 3rd officer who came to his colleague's rescue. The problem is you would need to read 8 paragraphs of CNN's report, and most people don't read more than the first paragraph of any news story before discovering the armed perpetrator opened fire first, taking out 2 police, and then was shot by a 3rd officer who arrived as backup. Now, I tell you this to make this point. Yeah. Think of the mental contortions it took CNN's headline writer doing everything linguistically possible to avoid saying that a person had a gun and shot 2 police with it. Yeah. Passive voice is discouraged when writing news headlines, unless, of course, it's to draw attention away from the fact that a suspect shot 2 police officers. So here's the question. Why would CNN want to disguise the simple fact of what actually happened? Well, I'll tell you why. The fact that police can be ambushed at a run-of-the-mill traffic stop doesn't fit the CNN narrative. Correct. The fact that a member of the public shot police rather than police shot black members of the public doesn't fit the CNN narrative. The fact that policing is a difficult and dangerous job doesn't fit the CNN narrative. So what do you do when actual facts from actual events don't conform to the pre-approved news narrative? You twist and contort and you duck and you weave and you stand on your head and you call it news. Yeah. But we all know it's not. It's just CNN. And that is typical of reporting these days.
You know, James, people aren't stupid anymore, and they're quite intelligent. And I think the media and politicians think that people are dumb, and they can't see that we're seeing the narrative. You know, when the coronavirus hit, and then the next big thing was George Floyd. All of a sudden, coronavirus wasn't on the front page of the news anymore.
Right, because coronavirus delineates between social justice marches and the other gathering, and it's amazing how the virus knows who to infect based on their social causes.
Yeah, I mean, I find it bizarre that movements like Black Lives Matter, who've raised $1 billion in the last 7 years, never once built a school, never once cleaned up a street in black neighborhoods, never once sent a child to school, $0 billion. And the likes of Antifa, whose website directly goes to Joe Biden's campaign. I'll let you maybe if you want to talk on that. But what I don't understand, What happened to George Floyd was absolutely murder and disgusting. It should never take place. But what's happened after that is people have been given a license to do worse. So it's not about George Floyd anymore. And yet since then, I think over 1,600 African Americans have been shot, killed by people of their own color, and a lot of them children. Why the silence, James?
So what was the question?
Why the silence, do you think? Why the silence?
Because it's not about black people. The left use black people to gain power. And I'll prove it to you. Black people are only useful to the left insofar as they help the left get power. Joe Biden just recently said, if you don't vote for me, you ain't black. Now, aside from being an incredible racial stereotype that Joe Biden can tell what you think based on the color of your skin, that's not right. Joe Biden will tell you what to think based on the color of your skin. Clearly, it's not about trying to help black people. It's using black people, which is why when you talk about race relations, America, if I can speak of America, America is the freest nation on earth.
Correct.
No one's getting in boats trying to get to Cuba. No one's trying to get out of America. Everyone's trying to get into
America,
which is amazing since we're continually told it's the most racist, bigoted, hateful country on earth. Well, someone ought to tell the public because everyone's trying to get there.
Yeah.
There has never been a freer nation on earth, and yet we are continually told systemic racism, whatever that means. Now, the left have to keep that narrative going because as soon as we admit, you know what, every individual is free to be whoever they decide they can be on their own merits, then you don't need the Democratic Party anymore to, to solve all your problems and to, rectify grievance. And so George Floyd, I was going to say, sadly, George Floyd has been used. It's actually not George Floyd who's been used. It's well-intentioned people. It's people who have a good heart and they're genuine, sincere people, and they've been manipulated. Their compassion has been manipulated, but not to help black people, but to keep black grievance going so that Democrats or the left can gain power. And we see the same thing happening in Australia.
Absolutely. I was just going to ask you.
That there's a vested interest to keep the Indigenous thing going, keep telling Indigenous people that they're oppressed, that they are victimized, that they can't be who they could possibly be. Keep that going so that certain people can gain power. It's just plain as the nose on your face.
It's interesting. If you're an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, and you speak out against that, my name escapes me. I think is it Harris?
Juanita Price.
Juanita Price. Yeah.
Price.
Yeah, I was close. Juanita Price. The vitriol she's received, it's amazing. Two things that are words that we keep coming up right now.
Yeah.
Cancel culture and woke. And again, I'm not having a shot at anyone in church life, but I am amazed at how many young preachers, I call them the skinny jeans set, get up there, ranting Black Lives Matter, and have given license for rioting. Because there's a difference between the statement, which is true, and the movement, which is anarchist in nature. But it's created this woke culture and cancel culture. Can you maybe explain to the listeners a little bit about woke and the whole intention behind cancel culture? What are your thoughts on that, by the way?
It's an interesting phrase, isn't it? Woke. The implication being you all are asleep. You all are snoozing, not just through history. You're snoozing through genocide, through racial oppression, but not me. No, I'm woke. I'm seeing all this. None of you are, but so that's the impression that this phrase, it's a very proud, arrogant phrase. That we need to be woke. And I guess it's describing your conscience is woke to all these these things. Of course, it's funny that some things no one wants to be woke to, like the fact that, 9 blacks were shot by police last year. 9 unarmed blacks in America were shot by police last year. But more than 1,000 black children or babies in the womb are aborted every day in America.
Correct.
Black babies are aborted at 4 times the rate of white babies. You want to talk about systemic racism in the United States? That's systemic racism because it's paid for by the government. And yet no one wants to talk about that. It's funny how people are woke to some things and they sleep through the other stuff.
Yeah.
And as for preachers, espousing BLM, Spurgeon used to say, preach with a newspaper in one hand and a Bible in the other. I think that's good preaching.
Absolutely.
But Absolutely. He didn't say preach with a slogan from CNN in one hand and a Bible in the other. If you're going to preach from the newspaper, at least take the time to understand the news.
Correct.
And not just to buy the narrative that you're fed from a very left-leaning media.
Cancel culture.
Cancel culture.
The cancel culture, James. I mean, we want to eradicate Captain Cook. We want to rewrite the history books. We want to tear down the statues. Everyone stop getting mad at China. Now they're mad at statues.
Right, because when Captain Cook landed on the shores of this country, he was thinking how much he hated George Floyd. The two are so connected, isn't it obvious? It's madness.
It is madness, yeah.
But here's the problem, right? We've got a generation who missed their historical opportunity. We all want to be part of history. We all want to do something that changes the world, but we missed our moment. I wasn't there when Martin Luther King spoke at the Washington Memorial. I hadn't been born, and I wasn't alive when Australians got to vote for Indigenous people to have the right to vote.
Yeah,
I missed those historical moments. But so how do I make history? So we've got a generation who are now manufacturing a crisis so they can solve the crises, so they can feel like I've done something significant to change the world. But I've got to tell you, pulling a statue down is not making history. It might give you a warm, fuzzy feeling, but it's a feeling. And we've got a generation that thinks with their feelings and reasons with their emotions. And so I guess if you feel like it's doing good, well, that's enough, and that's your historic moment. But it's not history. It's sentimentality gone mad.
It was interesting to me, the desecration of the Captain Cook statue in, I think it was in Sydney, was done by a member of the Greens Party. And and even in Victoria right now, Dictator Dan at 1:56 a.m. in the morning, under the cover of COVID, the cover of night, gets his Green mates and everyone else to give him the power to lock down a state again.
Pat, there was famously in Australia just a month ago, an Indigenous activist campaigned long and hard to have coon cheese rebrand because the name coon has been used as a derogatory term for Indigenous people, though coon cheese was named after the guy who invented a way to mature cheese. So this was a great victory for Indigenous rights, okay? But here's the problem, and I've got black children, okay?
Yeah, that's
so,
right.
So there's a couple of problems with this stupidity. Firstly, when everything is racism, nothing is racism. And so you don't fight racism by calling everything racism. That's the way you trivialize racism.
Yeah.
Second of all, they turn racism into a joke. I mean, it's hilarious. Coon cheese is racist. He said this, he said, every time I walk through the supermarket aisle, I'm being belittled. What? By the cheese? But here's the thing. My kids tell me at school that racism has become a joke. Like, do you want to kick the football at lunchtime? Nah. Oh, racist. Ha ha ha. And so racism's become a joke. And as the father of black children, racism, real racism, is devastating.
Absolutely.
I've got black children. Don't turn this into a joke. But it's not me that's turning racism into a joke. There are black people who are turning racism into a joke because it's not about racism. It's about power. It's about feeling victimized and then trying to claim some sort of compensation. And at the same time that this gentleman was complaining about coon cheese, tragically, in a community in Northern Australia, there was a 5-year-old boy who was gang raped by 4 other boys under the age of 13. And while Indigenous children are being sexually abused, we've got Indigenous activists complaining about the name of coon cheese.
It's ridiculous.
And it is ridiculous. But it's worse than ridiculous. It's horrifying and it's wrong, because there are real issues that need to be addressed. But these are not systemic racism issues. They're issues of culture, and they're issues of they're issues that shouldn't be trivialized and just it's white people's fault. And
it's almost when we constantly redefine something, it loses its value.
Yes.
But the redefinition of marriage, or redefinition of what family is, it waters down the value of something. And it's almost like, all you've got to say now is, I'm offended, and everyone from the government to politicians jump up in arms. And what's scary, and I think you mentioned this on one of your shows, we're raising a generation of weak people, because the moment they say offended, we cancel it. We don't teach them to grow and change. James, one of the things I love about it is you use satire and wit, and to get a lot of truth out. When you see something come out in the media or you read, how does your mind process some of that stuff? Because I think you're a freaking genius. I want to get inside your head a little bit.
When I read the media, I guess I'm always looking for, what are they actually trying to say? Because it's so rare now for the news to simply be reported.
Yeah.
Rather, there's a narrative that is continually reinforced. And it's almost like...
Henderson's dead and gone, bro. We don't have that anymore.
So, and it's becoming increasingly shameless. The way that the news, they're not even pretending to report what's happening. It's like, peaceful protests. And then behind the CNN reporter, you've got rocks being thrown and buildings on fire, or it was a fiery peaceful protest, I think they said the other day. They're not even pretending.
No.
So it's pretty funny. I think a lot of the news is, it's very sad, but if you don't laugh, you'll cry.
James, I've really enjoyed this interview. Your insight and wit and wisdom is outstanding. Now, guys, we've got James doing a couple of monologues. I'm going to let him loose on you guys over the next few days. And James, always a pleasure talking to you and picking your brain. Is there anything you want to leave us before we end the program today?
Look, I think the most important thing is that we continue to speak the truth, and to there's an old expression that the media keep telling you that your eyes are lying. What I'm seeing, but what I'm hearing from the media are two different things. Yeah. And the media keeps saying, don't believe your lying eyes. No, I know what I'm seeing with my own eyes, and it's completely different to what I'm hearing through the media. And I think people need to trust what they're seeing with their own eyes, and then be brave enough to say, no, I can see it plain as day in front of me. And I think the more people that speak, the more people that feel courageous enough to speak. And it doesn't take many people to point out that the emperor's wearing no clothes. But incidentally, Pat, this is why humor and satire is so important.
Very important.
This is why, the Ayatollah Khomeini famously said there are no jokes in Islam. Well, there can't be. Because as soon as someone points out the stupidity or the foolishness or the humor of something, it collapses. This is why the left, political correctness, does not allow jokes. This is why Seinfeld can't do stand-up in universities. You're not allowed to laugh, because if someone laughs, the whole thing falls down, because we realize it is a joke. The emperor's walking straight down the road naked, and everybody says, oh, wonderful, wonderful, until a kid can't help it anymore but starts snickering because I can see his willy. And the moment that kid laughs, the whole thing is over, because everyone, of course I can see it. He's nude and it's funny. And I think people have to ignore the media who keep saying, don't believe your lying eyes. Yeah. No, I will believe my eyes. They're not lying. And I'm going to tell you what I can see, plain as day. And I'm going to continue to point out and even mock the stupidity of those who tell me otherwise. I think that's the only way that things start to turn.
James, I look forward to your monologues. Now, guys, get on board James' podcast and his website, his Twitter account. It's all in the chat. James McPherson, look forward to the monologues. We'll chat later.
Thanks, Pat.